Non-Monogamy Help is a podcast where your questions about open, non-monogamous or polyamorous relationships are answered. Our host, Lola Phoenix, will consult a licensed therapist with over a decade of experience to address your problems. Names and locations have been changed or censored to keep your questions anonymous. You're listening to Non-Monogamy Help, the podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 24 of Non-Monogamy Help. I'm Lola Phoenix. Please send your questions to nonmonogamyhelp@gmail.com and they'll be either in the podcast or the column anonymously. You're welcome to choose which one you'd like. You can read the column at nonmonogamyhelp.com, sign up to our newsletter at tinyletter.com/nonmonogamyhelp, or follow us on Twitter at nonmonogamyhelp. If you want to be awesome, you can become a patron even for $1 a month. It's super helpful, and you can do that at patreon.com/Lola Phoenix. Before we get to this week's letter, I'm going to read our discussion question for this week, and it's slightly complicated. So here goes. Which better describes you? 1. When my partner disappoints me, I go cold, tend to withdraw, and like to be alone. Or 2. When my partner disappoints me, I feel panicked and explode into rage with them. And usually with these questions, I answer them very, very briefly so that you can have some sort of context when you use them with your partners or your friends or whomever you'd like to use them with. So for me, I think the second one sort of describes me. When my partner disappoints me is a bit of a weird thing to say. I don't know if that feeling disappointed is something that I feel very frequently. It's just a thing. But I do think when I get upset, I'm probably more likely to be really panicked and maybe not explode into rage, but I do get angry. And that's something that I'm kind of trying to work on a lot, because for a long, long time, I think I was number one instead. Like, I kind of withdrew and wanted to be alone because whenever I had a problem with something, I would just sort of bottle it up and just not talk about it, because I thought that no one would care to listen to it, no one would care to respond to it. And it's taken me a while to actually say, you know what, if somebody cares about me, then they will care that they've hurt me, and I should talk about it. However, I'm still not at a point where I'm able to kind of say that something's bothering me without being upset about it. Like, in my brain is kind of going, okay, you're upset about something, you're supposed to say something about it and not bottle it up, but yet you need to still protect yourself. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, yes, say something about it, but be really, really angry, because being really angry is going to protect you from someone making fun of you or not taking your concerns seriously. Because whenever I did actually say something when I was upset, I had to be really angry about it so that people would listen to me or take me seriously or wouldn't make fun of me, because I did often have that a lot in my childhood where people would make fun of me for being upset. So I'm trying really hard now to learn how to have healthy confrontation, and that's something that's been really, really difficult for me, and a huge, huge challenge for me, to not only be able to bring up that someone's hurt me, and then also as well to do it in a calm and healthy way. But yeah, that would be my answer. It's a little bit of two. I don't think I explode into a rage. I hope I'm not like that. But I do think I go more for the anxious than for the withdrawal now. And hopefully we'll work on that. So yeah, let me repeat this so that you can do it with friends, partners, whomever. Which better describes you? 1. When my partner disappoints me, I go cold, tend to withdraw, and like to be alone. 2. When my partner disappoints me, I feel panicked and explode into rage with them. So yeah, which one are you? Anyway, let's go to this week's question. When I recorded this, I was recording it in some very, very hot weather, even though it is very, very cold now, so you will hear a fan background noise. So apologies for that, but yeah, here's this week's letter. My name is X and I'm from Brazil. Now I'm living in the United States for like a month already, and I'm going to be here for 1 or 2 years for an exchange program. I have a girlfriend called P. We've been together for almost 3 years and she's in Brazil. I started to have conversations with her about non-monogamous relationships at the start of our relationship, like in the first year, because I always loved the idea of those kind of relationships at the beginning. She didn't accept the idea very well, and she didn't show interest about those conversations. Then she began to better accept the idea, and we always talked about it, like it would be good for us if we could see someone, go out with someone and stuff like that, but nothing happened and everything was just a theory. But we kept talking about this and reading stuff online, seeing videos, etc. to understand better everything. So everything started this one day when we were at the LGBTQ Pride Parade in Brazil and we met this girl, Elle. We were enjoying the party and we looked at each other and we said that we wanted to kiss Elle, so we kissed her, but separately. And everything was really cool. We enjoyed it very much. After that day of the parade, we went out with Elle 3 more times and we had sex with her. It was a new experience for all of us. I liked it, but I was a little bit scared and uncomfortable, and I cannot be totally comfortable with the sex itself. And my girlfriend loved everything and wanted to continue seeing Elle. After this 3rd time, I realized that my girlfriend was enjoying it a lot more than I was, and I didn't enjoy the sex like the best time of my life, I liked it, but it wasn't one of the best experiences. I just felt weird after that. So I talked to my girlfriend and I told her that I was not enjoying having sex with Elle, and that I thought we should stop going out with her because we could end up creating some feeling, and everything would be a mess because I was afraid of hurting Elle. She's much younger than me, and she never dated anyone anyway. I was afraid to continue and make her create expectations that my girlfriend and I could not keep. And when I talked to my girlfriend about it, I was already creating a very emotional connection with Elle. I forgot to mention the fact that I'm demisexual. Continuing, I was beginning to have feelings for her, and I did not know how to deal with all this, mainly because I already knew that I would be moving to the United States at that time, so everything would be very confusing for us. I told this to my girlfriend, and she agreed we had to stop, but despite agreeing, she did not want to. Then I proposed to her that if she wanted to, she could still see Elle, but she didn't want to. Then we stopped seeing Elle, and we became friends with her. We decided that our relationship would be open, but soon after I changed my mind because I was very scared and afraid with 1,000 things to solve in Brazil that I could not come to the US, and I didn't want to deal with problems of open relationship in the midst of a lot of things going on in my life. My girlfriend was always very understanding, but I thought it was very bad, this attitude that I had, like, to open and close a relationship very fast. I think a lot in things. I rationalize a lot. I change my mind very fast. My zodiac sign is Gemini, just so you have an idea. Anyway, we decided to close a relationship, and we were fine in that. Before I came here, we talked a lot, and we thought it would be best to keep the relationship closed. That's when the idea came back again. I've been here for more than 1 month, and this weekend, me and my girlfriend had a talk. She started the subject, in fact, that she was in the mood to go out with other people because she was feeling needy, missing me, and missing having sex. I agreed with her because I miss all those things too, and after spending hours talking, we decided to open the relationship again. The first time we tried, and I soon gave up. We put in rules like not being able to get emotionally involved with other people, not having sex with other people if we could not be together. But how we closed the relationship 2 days later, nothing happened. We didn't know anyone, and we didn't have to apply any rules. This time we decided there won't be any rules. Only regarding sex for our sexual health care. We will try to avoid oral sex. We will ask people if they've been tested. I'm very paranoid and worried about our sexual health. 6 months after we had sex with Elle without protection, because protection for lesbian sex in Brazil is almost non-existent. My partner and I did the tests. Everything was okay with us, but I was freaking out all the time before taking the tests. I always have anxiety and think about it, and I believe it has messed me up too during sex with Elle because I did not feel safe at all. In fact, these questions about STIs haunt me and torment me. Sometimes I wonder if I should continue in a closed relationship, having the stress every time a new person comes along. The question is, now my relationship is open. My partner and I agree that we will be able to stay with whoever we want if the opportunity arises, and even stay with someone we have stayed with in the past. There will be no rule about it, and we agree about having emotional bonding with people, not just for sex, but everything has been tormenting me because I'm afraid of my girlfriend falling madly in love with someone else and ending the relationship with me. I'm afraid that the open relationship will end everything we've built together. I'm afraid of losing it. I'm afraid of when I return to Brazil, she won't want to be with me anymore. I don't know if we will continue in an open relationship when I return. Is it just a phase? Once you have a non-monogamous relationship, things change forever. I don't know how everything works out in practice because in theory things are pretty simple for me. I know that all these things I'm afraid of can happen to me being in close relationship too. I know that, but I still feel stressed, scared, and anxious. This year's being a very different year for me because I'm dealing with huge changes, different culture, different language, and there's so much going on that I don't know if I made the right decision to open the relationship in this phase of my life, that it's already being crazy. But I wanted to be able to continue with the relationship open because I want to meet people here, but it's very hard. Oh my god, that's it. Thank you so much for reading all this. Really appreciate it. Just need some advice because I don't know what to do. I think my brain will explode in pieces. So, the very first thing that I see, which is like really, really common with people opening their relationships, is rules and boundaries are good, but if rules and boundaries are made in order to prevent something that is not preventable, then that rule or boundary is kind of pointless. You're creating a lot of rules and boundaries to prevent things from happening, to prevent your fears. You're afraid of your girlfriend finding someone new, leaving you, etc. and so forth. And you do say that you realize that you can't prevent that even in a closed relationship, but you are still trying to prevent it. All these rules that you're having about the ones you spoke about that you had before, about not falling in love with somebody else, or even not being willing to have sex with someone unless you both were there. All of these are done to try and, because you're afraid to try and grasp some type of stability. And in the end, I think that these only delay the inevitable. These only make it more difficult for you to actually deal with the stress of being afraid, because you're going to be afraid. It's very, very logical to be afraid. I can only speak for the countries that I have lived in and grown up in, so I don't know if this is necessarily true for you. I'm assuming, but we live in a society, or I at least have lived in a society that's told me that monogamy is the norm, it's the standard, and it's not only the norm and the standard, but it's being exclusive is the way that you show that you care about someone, and that you can only show that you care about someone by promising to only be with them. And so you're kind of flipping the script on that, so you're going to be afraid. It's not completely illogical to think, if I let my partner sleep with other people, they may replace me. That's not a completely illogical fear. That's a very, very logical fear. However, it is helpful to continue to reframe that, and I'll speak a little bit more about this in general, but alongside reframing, it's going to help you cope with it better if you don't try and prevent yourself from feeling it. In my experience with my anxiety, the more I try to prevent my anxiety from happening, the less it actually helps me cope with anxiety. And especially with anxiety in particular, it's kind of like you give it an inch and it will take a mile. The more you sort of go, okay, well, I get anxious when I eat rice, so I won't eat rice. And then you think you're fine with the anxiety, but then something else kind of triggers it. And okay, now I can't eat beans, now I can't eat this, now I can't eat that. It just grows and grows and grows. And I do very much feel like, the more rules you say, okay, we can't fall in love with someone else, we can't do this, we can't do that, the more you try and prevent it, the more it puts that responsibility on your shoulders, and the more it actually just makes you more anxious, in my opinion. So even though you don't have any rules right now, you have opened and closed and opened and closed and opened and closed, because you still are under the belief that closing it is going to make things easier. And it just isn't necessarily going to make things easier. It will make things more familiar for you, because that's where your comfort zone is, but it won't necessarily make things easier, and it isn't necessarily a guarantee to prevent the things that you're afraid of. So definitely think about any rules from here on out that you put in, that you enforce. Is it really about avoiding, is it going to prevent something from happening? Like sexual health rules are a little bit more, well placed, because they are designed to prevent, STI transmission, and that is a kind of not always clear cut. Like there's always some risk, but it is a bit more clear cut. Whereas if you come up with a rule that's like, we're not going to fall in love with anybody else, how are you going to even measure that? You can't take a test about whether or not you've fallen in love with someone. So it's a very nebulous rule that's really only designed to try and prevent you from falling in love with someone else, or prevent your girlfriend from falling in love with someone else, because you think that if they do, it automatically means that they'll leave you, and you're afraid of that. So just be aware of that. I think that the other really big problem that you are both having is that you are not operating as individuals. You are operating as a couple. And if you think about the way that you've treated Elle in this, it's not really fair. Even though you've tried to prevent feelings from being hurt, I can't speak for Elle. I don't know how Elle feels, but it's not really fair to Elle. You are deciding upon things as a group without consulting Elle, deciding that, okay, well, we're gonna close the relationship now because we don't want to hurt Elle, and this is we, and Elle is separate from that. And you've kind of created a system where Elle has no say, and Elle is just kind of a pawn in your game, and it's not really cool. You are inherently separate now because you are in the States and your girlfriend is in Brazil, but your approach to this needs to be individualized. There are some people who date as a couple, and I think if you want to date as a couple, then you need to present as we are dating as a couple and we are looking for someone to be interested in both of us. I think that that's very, very hard to find, and especially like when you present it that way, because if you consider it from the point of view of someone like Elle who isn't in a couple, it can already be monotonous and scary to be involved in a single person relationship, let alone be in a situation where you feel like you have to fall in love with two people in order for this to work at all. You know, you didn't have to break it off with her, but because you were so afraid and you needed to act as a couple, you could have, you know, you said you were fine with P, your partner, dating Elle on her own. And that would have been fine. But because you're so acting as a couple as another form of protecting yourself from something terrible happening, you're not really behaving in a way that's going to be good for other people in the long term, or be good for you, because you're so focused on protecting the mothership that you are treating other people like crap, and you shouldn't do that. So I think you need to start seeing other people not as additions onto your coupledom, but you need to separate yourselves from each other in your mind. You need to operate as individuals, and you need to date individually, and not date, you know, not say we wanted to kiss her, like you both wanted to kiss her as separate people. You need to think of yourself as individuals and stop this, like, unless you're going to fully present as a couple dating, looking for a third, which I don't think you should, because I think it's impossible to find, and that's not an appealing situation for anyone. You really need to date individually. Even though you say that you know that being in a closed relationship doesn't prevent you from being hurt, you are still operating in a way, as I said, where you think that closing your relationship is going to protect you. And as I said, it may make things mentally easier for you because you aren't as afraid or as vigilant if it's closed, because you're luring yourself into a false sense of security, and it is also more familiar for you. So you think, oh, well, we've closed a relationship, I don't have to worry about someone coming and taking my girlfriend. But you know logically that is not true. People in monogamous relationships all the time meet other people, you know, whether or not they have permission to have sex with that person or not, whether or not they have permission to fall in love with that person or not, they do fall in love with other people other than their partner. They do break up. There isn't anything that you are going to be able to do to prevent that. And I think you really, really need to seep yourself into that. Like, don't just say, oh, well, closing the relationship won't stop it. You need to acknowledge that you fully have no control whatsoever over whether or not your partner remains in love with you. That is just not something that you can control. Now, you know, you can act like a total ass and you can be mean to your partner, and that's pretty much going to guarantee that they don't want to be around you. True, but that's a little bit different. Barring, you know, putting your best foot forward and being as receptive and as understanding and as kind as you can be, regardless of that, if your partner doesn't want to be with you, there is nothing you can do to prevent that from happening. You just can't. And I think that really owning that is going to help you deal with a lot of this anxiety, because the reason you have all this anxiety, the reason you're so scared and anxious, is because you feel like you can change it. When you think you can change it, either by closing the relationship, creating all these rules, or whatever you want to do, you think, I can change whether or not my partner falls in love with someone else. I can control that by putting in all these rules. You know, we promised we wouldn't fall in love. Your brain does not give a solid gold-plated chicken fried fuck whether or not you have made a rule about whether you can fall in love with somebody or not. Your brain doesn't care. If we could control who we fell in love with, I probably wouldn't have a column. Nobody would be writing to me for advice if people could easily control who they could fall in love with. It just isn't something you can easily control. So you have to really radically embrace that, and it seems kind of contradictory, but actually in my experience with my anxiety, the best thing that helped me deal with my anxiety was I had to stop feeling like I was pushing this boulder up a hill, and then the second I had a panic attack, the ball rolled back and I'm not going to push it up and up and up again. I was continuously beating myself up because I kept feeling like anxiety made me a failure. I kept feeling like if I had a panic attack, it was a setback. If I had anxiety, it was a setback. If I had any kind of emotional breakdown or anything like that, it was a setback and I did something wrong and I wasn't handling it right. And you can't heal yourself if you are too busy beating yourself up. So you cannot actually deal with all this anxiety if you're putting the entire burden of this on your shoulders. And you are putting that burden on your shoulders. You say you know that it'll happen if I'm in a close relationship, but you're still putting that burden on your shoulders, and you need to take that off of your shoulders and realizing that opening and closing, all these rules, nothing is going to prevent it. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen, and you will survive. You won't die. I know that, you've been in this relationship for 3 years. It feels intense. It is intense. But people have survived it, and it sucks. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, breaking up is no big deal. And I know, like, I always kind of encourage people not to feel like breaking up is always like a failure, or that, a relationship isn't only a success if, no one makes it out alive. As Dan Savage says, and I don't really like Dan Savage, but that quote is fine, broken clocks. The point is that, it does still suck, even if it isn't a failure. It is sad and it is a loss, but you cannot prevent it. You cannot, putting all of that pressure on yourself is probably what's making most of this worse. And the fact that you think that you can prevent it, when you do open your relationship, there's all this stress on you that's like, okay, I've got to be vigilant. I've got to make sure that this, and you're just putting so much pressure on yourself. So please try to steep that, get that really solidly in your mind, that you cannot ultimately control this. And closing it is not going to fix it. Closing it will not fix it. It can only delay the inevitable. You're only temporarily relieving yourself of the anxiety for a short period of time. You say I get that you're in a new country. It's complicated. There's a lot of stuff going on, but there's going to be a lot of stuff in life going on. If you spend the rest of your life with this person, with P, when you have a baby, if you decide to adopt or have a baby, that's going to be a new change. Someone in your immediate family that you love very much could die at any point. That will be a huge change. There's all different kinds of things in life that are huge, monumental changes. And you can't prevent that from happening. And you can't put your entire life on hold all the time for what is a little bit of change. It is more difficult. Like, I'm not going to deny that dealing with this while you are in a new country and dealing with all that stress is a little bit more difficult. But, what you need to do is focus less on trying to prevent that difficultness from happening and more on strengthening whatever foundations you have with P, which also kind of brings me to my next point, which will help ground you a little bit more. You have introduced this idea of non-monogamy within your first year, and she's kind of slowly taken to it, and she has kind of fully embraced it, but it doesn't sound like you've really thought about what you want from non-monogamy. Like, what is your ideal situation? This is kind of something that I reiterate and I tell people all the time, because it is kind of a grounding exercise. We have to remember that when you live in a society where monogamy is the norm, where polyamory is not reflected in any form of media, where you don't see any polyamorous people, you are operating without a cultural script. You are operating without any kind of basic steps into making a relationship feel more secure. So there's the relationship escalator, and if you haven't heard of it, look it up. It's a really great concept. It's basically that, the sort of societal script we have where it's like, okay, you date someone, and then you move in, and then you marry, and then you have kids. You kind of have this already hewn path that you can go down that tells you, okay, when you move in with someone, things are a little bit more secure. You're a little bit more committed to each other. There's these symbolic, stages that we go through that indicate that our lives are a little bit more enmeshed and we feel a lot more secure. That's not to say you don't, get married to someone you're married for 30 years. They could totally cheat on you and your relationship could end. But because we have all of these little rites of passage that we go through that sort of reinforce the idea of security to us, we are less afraid. We don't angst about it all the time because it's kind of culturally inferred. When you're polyamorous, when you have an open relationship, that is not culturally inferred. So you have to figure out what your ideal looks like and where, what role non-monogamy plays in your life. And that can sometimes really help ground you. It can help you figure out who you want to date. It can help you explain to people what your needs are and just help you get more established as a couple and figure out, what is your ideal situation? If your partner does want to date L, what does that look like? Instead of thinking about that even individually and then coming together as a unit that's already kind of established and thinking about how that plays into how you interact, you didn't really think of a situation where L could coexist. And you could have had a situation where you thought, okay, well, maybe P dates L and they spend Tuesdays and Fridays together or whatever. Thinking about that kind of a thing. What is it that you think is ideal for you. First and foremost, think about that. Ask your partner to think about that, and then come together and have a discussion about it. And that will help you feel a little more grounded. You won't feel quite so anxious and terrified about, all these questions you have about what if she changes her mind when I go back to Brazil? What if she doesn't want to be with me? Da, 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 da. If you kind of come together and figure out what it is that you both are interested in, how you see non-monogamy working in your life, it might, pull up some things where you're directly not compatible on. And then maybe this entire point is moot because it turns out like maybe she wants 5 kids and you don't want any kids, or you may have already had that discussion. But what I'm saying is that figure out what that ideal is and then talk about it and see if you can establish, not necessarily a plan that you have to stick to. It's not meant to dictate your future, but it's meant to just give you more grounding, because right now you don't have any grounding. That's why you're so freaked out. That's why you have all these questions and you're not sure and you're thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't open it, I should close it, da, da, da. Because when you close it, you have that script, more or less. Even though, obviously being a lesbian or being LGBTQ in society kind of differs you from that cultural script in some ways, but you still kind of have a little bit of a script to go by, so you feel a little bit more secure in that. So you've got to create that script, and that will make you feel a lot more secure. I think that another thing that you should also address in terms of your fears is you need to learn a little bit more about STIs. And the thing that you always have to remember, and I'm not sure how it is in Brazil, but I know at least in the US, there is a lot of fear-mongering. And that means that people basically make STIs out to be a lot more terrifying than they are. And obviously there are permanent STIs in terms of, things that aren't curable, but the way that medicine has developed, depending on your circumstance, I can't say what it will be like when you go back to Brazil. Obviously there might be more things you have to worry about in terms of healthcare, not sure. But not everything is a death sentence. There is risk with all sexual activity, but there are certain acts that you can do that are less of a risk for certain things than others. There's great resources in the US. There's Scarleteen, which you can look for online. That's SCARLETEEN. So like Scarlet and then teen, but then with 1 T. I think it's with 1 T. There's also San Francisco Sex Information. There are a lot of sites you can find that will delineate what kind of risks are involved with certain sexual acts, depending on you and your partner's genitalia, and that can help you figure out things that you're a bit more comfortable with. But I also think that you need to remember that all sexual activity comes with some risk. You can't completely eliminate all risk. And it's also worth you remembering that the vast majority of STIs are not that big of a deal. People make them way more of a bigger of a deal than they actually are. Most things are curable. There are some things that are, there's some antibiotic resistance and some issues going on with that in terms of chlamydia and some other STIs. But for the most part, it's not, it's sort of like driving. Driving is, I'm not sure again in Brazil if it's different, but driving is a cultural norm. People think that you have to, especially in the US, like you go to school and you learn how to drive when you're 16, and that's kind of a rite of passage. I think if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong about this, but if I remember correctly, most young people, like the highest risk of death for young people is actually car accidents in the US. If I'm not mistaken, that's like the number one way that kids die. And people, when they talk to you about driving, they don't, show you pictures of people who've been in car accidents. They don't describe to you all of the injuries you could get if your car crashes. I mean, generally speaking, maybe they do in some places. They tell you to buckle up, and they reinforce things that will make driving more dangerous, like driving when you're extremely exhausted, obviously drunk driving, they not texting while you're driving. There are lots of different things, but it's all from a place of accepting the fact that you're going to drive and trying to protect you and trying to make you aware. And we also don't blame people. Like in general, if someone gets hit by a car, we don't, we accept that, depending on the situation, maybe there might have been something you could do to avoid it, but we aren't as stigmatizing about that experience as we are about STIs. And I think it would help if you kind of think of STIs in the same way you do car accidents. And even, I think car accidents are even more dangerous because car accidents can result in, if not death, then some serious injury. But the point of it is having that approach of okay, I'm going to drive. Therefore, there is some inherent risk of that I cannot, no matter how much I wear my seatbelt, no matter how many times I check my mirrors, no matter how many traffic laws I obey, there is nothing I can do to ultimately prevent being in a car accident. So I think you should also take that approach with you. I mean, this might be terrible. Maybe you're like also terrified of being in cars. I don't know. But I think it helps to kind of realize that we have been, especially in the US, again, can't say for sure about Brazil, generally speaking, when people teach sex ed in a lot of places, they teach it from the standpoint of using STIs to make people feel afraid to have sex. And it's just not helpful and just complete bollocks. So try to learn a little bit more about STIs if you don't already know. I mean, you say STI, so that leads me to believe you do know a little bit more about STIs than most people who continue to say STDs today. But learn as much as you can. Learn about different things. You know, if you're in the US now, see if you can get some dental dams or some finger cuts if you want. You know, and just learn which acts come with which risk. And, you know, generally speaking, I just don't think that there are a lot of things that you have to worry about, especially if you do have any kind of penetrative sex and you use condoms. You know, some of the things like HPV or herpes, you know, most people have HPV, or a lot of people have herpes. Like, it's very, very common with herpes. It's like more of the stigma that's the problem than it is the actual condition. So just try and keep that in mind. Like, and if you use protection, there are a lot of things that, you know, you are protected from. So if you kind of figure out, you know, what sort of risk you are risking, then you can use that to calm yourself a little bit. But yeah, just to recap, I think that, you know, one last thing I kind of want to reiterate is that you're feeling anxious and scared is very, very normal. Even though you've been in this relationship for 3 years, you are in a position where a lot of things are up in the air. You're in a whole new country. You're now in a long-distance relationship, which makes things a little bit more difficult. It makes total sense that you would feel scared and stressed and anxious. That isn't abnormal. So try not to set up that expectation of yourself. I do sometimes think when people open their relationship, especially if they've done it for a person and they've had really good good experiences with that person, they got a little bit scared. They tend to think that opening the relationship will always come with more happy feelings, but sometimes it does come with a lot of fear, especially if you're just starting to open your relationship with one person and you're trying something new and you're sort of going into a different area of trust that you kind of have to build together. So it makes sense that you would be scared and anxious. So don't kick yourself for that. It's the first big thing. Again, to recap, stop creating rules to prevent what you can't prevent. Stop making rules that will prevent your girlfriend from falling in love with someone else. That will prevent you from falling in love with someone else. You can't prevent that. So just don't make any rules. Whenever you decide to make a new rule, really examine it. Really ask yourself what is this rule for? What is it trying to prevent? Will it actually prevent that? Because I think you'll find that there are quite a lot of rules, you know, that you feel like you should put in place to kind of make yourself feel better. But in the end, if it's designed to prevent you from experiencing the fear, I don't think that helps, because you'll just continue to kind of not fully get into the fear, not know fully what it means to be in a non-monogamous relationship where you don't have rules, and you won't be able to be prepared for it. It'll just kind of delay you actually getting used to it. Again, you need to see people as people. You need to date as individuals. I think now that you're in separate countries, that's probably going to not be such an issue. But do keep that in mind when you get back together, when you're back in Brazil. Like, dating as a couple. If you want to date as a couple, then date as a couple. Again, I don't think you should do that, because I don't think that's an appealing arrangement for a lot of people. Date individually. Date as people. And don't consider another person as an accessory to your couple relationship, or assume that your couple relationship is kind of like the mothership that needs to be saved at all costs, and any other relationship is just, you know, disposable. Because it really sucks. It really, really sucks to be a person who is dating someone and dating two people and having a good time, and then all of a sudden, you know, you can't do anything romantic anymore. You can't have sex anymore because for whatever reason these two people have decided that you're not allowed to have that anymore and you've had no say. Like, it really, really sucks to be put in that position. I don't think you'd want to be put in that position if you really think about it. So try not to put other people in that position, because especially if you're going to go out and try to date while you're back in Brazil and you're together, you're going to really struggle to find people who are going to be receptive to that, and you can potentially really hurt some people's feelings if you don't treat them, you know, as individuals and as your relationships as separate, unless they've agreed to date you as a couple and that's what they expect and all that sort of thing. Please date as individuals. Again, closing your relationship is not protecting you from anything. Even though you kind of say that you know that all of it can happen when you're in a closed relationship, you are still opening and closing as if that's going to protect you. So try and really steep yourself into that, because it will take so much off your shoulders. Like, it will take so much of the responsibility of keeping your partner and making sure that you're interesting enough and da-da-da-da. It will take so much weight off of your shoulders, and I think you'll find that it'll relieve some of that anxiety. Again, anchor yourself by figuring out what it is that you want from non-monogamy, asking your partner to think about what she wants, coming together and having a discussion about where you see your relationship, where you see, your individual dating going on in your relationship. Maybe think about some physical things, like, especially now that you're long distance, those physical things will get really important. Maybe you have a standing date always on Thursday evening, that you have a call together, and that those kind of anchors will really, really help you, not just in feeling a little bit more relaxed about where your relationship is going, but also the fact that you're so far apart. Having those scheduled date times will really help you feel valued, and especially if she's going to be off dating some other people, what you don't want is to end up in a situation where you haven't really established how important that is with each other, and so she kind of ends up blowing you off a bit, kind of getting caught up in new relationship energy and feeling excited about having dates, and maybe kind of accidentally blows you off a bit, or maybe you do that to her. That can often happen to people in long distance relationships. So try and establish yourself, ground yourself together a little bit by sharing what you kind of want out of this, where you see your future going, what your ideal situation is. Really think about that kind of stuff, is that will help you figure out as well, if this relationship doesn't work out, if you have a good idea of what you want from a relationship instead of just being in one because society says you should be, that will help you in the future if things don't work out, because at least then you have a clear picture of what it is that you want, and it'll help you a lot more in the future. Last but not least, learn more about sexual health so that you don't feel quite as scared. It's okay to be scared. Like, I have a weakened immune system, so I'm really, really super paranoid about STIs as well. And it is really hard. But at least in my personal experience, like, I had to just, know as much as I could know. I did learn as much as I could, but I also just had to go through it. Sometimes with anxiety, the only way out is through. The only way to deal with it is to go through it and come out the other end and know that you've survived and you haven't died and the world isn't ending and you're okay. And I think that in my experience with STIs, when I was fluid bonded with someone, it was, every time they slept with someone new, it was so much anxiety, so much fear of like, and I just had to like realize that, me being anxious isn't going to stop it. There's nothing, again, it's about relinquishing that control from your shoulders. Like, I had to accept the fact that all sex came with some kind of risk, and that unless I was going to be, a completely celibate person, I had to just accept that the risk is going to happen. And just as time goes on, as you kind of build up that, stability with your partner, and also as you build up more experience in being more exposed to sexual health risk, it will not be so anxiety provoking in the future. But it is something new for now. You're trying something new. You also are dealing with a really big stressful thing of being in another country. So there's going to be a lot of anxiety flowing. And with some things, you're going to have to just kind of go with it and experience that anxiety. Stop preventing yourself so much from experiencing it and just deal with it. Expect it, you'll be anxious, and just embrace it and, see that you come out on the other side, because it does get better. Like, I can, even in the first kind of bits of relationships I've had where either we've opened up the relationship or I've started a new non-monogamous relationship with someone, always wicked anxious with that, because it's a different thing. It's not better, it's not worse, but it's a different thing. And because it's so uncommon, you have to kind of build that within yourself, that all those kind of given things that create that feeling of stability, you kind of just have to build those yourself. And that's tough, but you can do it. It's not the end of the world, but you definitely have to just let yourself feel that. You have to face it. You can't prevent it by opening and closing things and putting all these rules. It hasn't helped you, because now you're in a situation where you're facing that anxiety. You don't have any rules now. Your relationship's open. You just got to bite the bullet and go and deal with some of the fear. But it will, all things change. Like, change is a constant, and it will change, and you will get over it. The anxiety will pass. You will not be stressed forever. Just try and use that as an anchor, as well as some of the other things I mentioned. So yeah, I really hope this helps, and good luck. Thank you again for listening to episode 24 of Non-Monogamy Help. You can, again, read the columns and listen to the other podcasts by going to nonmonogamyhelp.com. You can sign up to our email newsletter and get the columns and the podcasts before they go public at tinyletter.com/non-monogamy-help. You can follow us on Twitter at non-monogamy-help. And if you want to be amazing, you can become a patron. Patrons who donate $5 or more have their names read at the end of the podcast if they so wish. And our current $5 patrons are Laura Boylan, Chris Albury-Jones, Juke, and James Ortel. Thank you so much to those $5 patrons, and thank you to you for continuing to listen. The next episode will be out in a fortnight, and the next column will be released next week. So, yeah, thank you again for listening. You've been listening to Non-Monogamy Help. Our podcast music has been provided by Chris Albury-Jones at albury-jones.com, and the art was made by Dom Jung at domduong.com. Thank you for listening.